Hi, welcome to the Career Composing Podcast, live stream episode number 2. Our goal is to help you compose your career outlook in a refreshing way. We believe every person has different skills, experiences, and dreams. And each one of those is like a small section of a musical composition, the little skills and experiences and dreams. Each of those, again, is like a small part of a broader musical composition. Some of those could be high notes, some of them could be low notes, different tempos, fast or slow. And it's really looking to see how all that connects and how all those sections work together. And at any point during this live stream, please feel free to share your career challenges that you like to discuss, and I'll try to help as much as I can. There are 3 ways to share. The first one is through the chat mechanism. The second is through a formal question view, the question and answer method. And then lastly, feel free to raise your hand. And here in the Zoom webinar, I can, my colleague Erica will then reach out to you in private chat. And then once you are ready, I can then grant you audio access, verbal access. And then we can then briefly chat about what you're encountering and then discuss from there. And while I'm waiting for anyone that'd be willing to share that, I wanted to talk about career paths today as a topic. And there's an article I found off of Indeed.com that I felt did a good job of talking through what a career path is and the various elements to that. So I'd like to briefly share that with you during this live stream. So on the screen, you will see probably a good view here. So on this, there are 9 steps on this Indeed.com article about career paths. And, I think a career path isn't something that has to be, from a timeline, it's linear. But I feel that people can have multiple careers and they may all be stops and starts on them. I certainly have had that throughout my career. And I think it's not having to be something that is very formal or has to be written in stone, but that as you go along and work along your career path and go about really kind of discovering that, I think it can be really exciting to do that and think about it up to this point on what your career path is, but also looking out to the future of what you'd like to compose for that. So what would your ideal vision or outlook be for your career? So they mentioned 9 items, and I'd like to briefly talk about each one of them here in this article. So the first one is really outlining your career goals. So what do I want for my career? What are my interests? What strengths and aptitudes do I have? Is there something I like to specialize in, or roles I like to pursue? I think this is really helpful in examining this. There's a Stephen Covey quote that I'm paraphrasing, where basically you don't want to put the ladder and run up the ladder on the wrong wall. And so it's really kind of taking a moment and making sure that, even in this case, you can potentially call it a career ladder, but making sure that what you're about to pursue makes sense, so that there's not really any wasted time or loss of time. And so thinking of these goals and looking at what that would take to attain those and talking with your friends and family about those, I think is really important. This next item they mentioned about creating a 5 to 10 year plan. This for me is really difficult and can be somewhat intimidating, thinking about what life could look like 5 to 10 years down the road, where it could be where in some cases people have just finished getting their degree or an advanced degree, or it could be that they have retired from military service, or in this case it could be a second or third job they think they like to ultimately attain, or maybe it's when their kids go off to college and they'll have potentially some time to dedicate to something they have not been able to do because of time constraints. I think giving it a shot and trying to do a 5 to 10 year plan is great. It doesn't have to be very thorough. It could be even some bullet points or things of like, in 5 years, I like to be, etc. It could be, a certain title that you have in a role, or it could be maybe a series of accomplishments that you have liked to have had in a certain field or profession. Personality type, they discuss and share Myers-Briggs and a few other ones. There are an assortment of tests and things people can take as far as assessments. I've taken probably 10 different ones, if not more, ranging from DISC profile to Myers-Briggs. I just recently took the Hogan assessment. You have some ones that focus more on the IQ side of things or focus more on like the strengths. So like StrengthsFinder 2.0 was a very popular book a few years ago. They've now rebranded that into being just your strengths in general. And some can really help see how you work with certain types of personalities, and others will help you determine like, hey, you have this personality, you may have a way that you lean towards a certain profession because of that. Some I feel need some interpretation, and one of the challenges that you take, let's say 2 or 3 of these types of assessments, how they all tie together. Going to the next point, number 4, review previous experience. I think this is, a great exercise of, is there a theme or series of themes that tie between, again, these little musical components of, let's say, your last 5 years of work experience? Do you pursue things that, are a certain topic, or is it because of the level of work? Is it because you have a certain passion about it and that's what's drawn you to that? But looking at those previous experiences, they could have various drivers and looking to see why. And some may not be as purposeful in the sense that I just need a job. I need something to bring in the income to take care of the family. And it may not be as much of a dream job that you'd like, but it could be something that you could look at as a stepping stone to what you would like to pursue. Number 5, comparing job requirements to your education. This is an interesting point because I've met a number of people who went into education and got their bachelor's, or they received their certificate or didn't pursue higher education, and all for a variety of reasons. And there isn't a right answer on any of that. Certain jobs do require certain education levels, certainly, but sometimes this may not be a fit for that time period, and that people may skip college for a period of time and then come back after 5 or 10 years in industry, especially for advanced degrees. But in light of that, it also goes back to, you have, let's say, a bachelor's and you want to pursue something that may not even require a bachelor's, but it requires a certain level of experience. And maybe that's something, it may not be a fit for you right now, but it could be something later on that you have. But in any regards, with, like, for instance, I got a management information systems degree, it's technically a business administration, bachelor's of business administration, with an emphasis in management information systems. So it's like a business tech degree. And I felt it actually it served me well because I enjoyed the business tech field. Whereas I know others who went into literature or English or an art, but then after being in that for a period of time, they decided to really shift gears and went into maybe another creative field. So they may have gone from writing and being a journalist, but then went into web copy and then went into the design element and, user experience design or something similar to that. So that their education may have helped them in that case, but other times it may not be a direct correlation to that. Number 6, assessing your current skill set. And I think this is where you need to really take an honest stock of what abilities and skills and talents that you have. And it could be just creating a punch list of, 5 or 10 that come to mind of, like, I like to analyze. I really enjoy the project management of things. I enjoy engaging with customers and talking with them. I also feel, and this is in addition to point 6 here in the article, I think there could also be skills that you can list that you aren't good at. So maybe you're not great. You're good at some general bookkeeping, but you're not really good at accounting because of all the technical items with how it all works in the back end. It could be, again, a good skill, or not a skill that you're comfortable with, could be you're talking with people and being around a lot of others, but you may not have a good skill of really working by yourself. And so I think, again, the skills inventory per se is important of what you do well, but also acknowledging what you may not do well. And I think knowing that can really be helpful in both things, so that as you, again, compose your career in figuring out what could be a next step, there could be things to avoid based on not only your experience, but also what you feel your skill set is. Number 7, taking note of your interests. As they mentioned, it leads off with, it depends on your personality. Certainly people who are more scientific minded may be interested in, going into biology or chemistry. Those who, are always wanting to fix things may want to go into engineering. And so there's items that you may be drawn to based on what you were raised in with your family. So let's say your father worked on cars a lot, and that's that taking apart and putting that together was something that you really enjoyed, and it's really satisfying for you. And so that could be a field you pursue because it's something that's of interest to you. Or it could be where you just have a certain desire to read various topics that, again, may touch on things that you're aware of that just seem to really kind of speak to you in regards to, hey, this material is really encouraging. I like it because it helps me make sense of the world. And so let's say going into the field of counseling, maybe an option, because that's something where you're wanting to see how you could help others along whatever they're working with because of your interest in helping work through that. Number 8, identifying your core values. This is certainly a very broad element. I think it goes to, certainly you have how you view the world and how you see, let's say, companies and how they value their employees or how they value their vendors, how they go about operating, and figuring out, does your value set align with how they operate or how they perceive that. I was recently talking with someone who may have, actually it was the previous episode where this one person was really liking this company and had applied, but it wasn't a fit at the time, that they were technically, according to the interviewer, overqualified. And but they keep being drawn back to that company because of that company's values. And that even though it was a year ago, I believe, that the person did try to apply for that role, one thing I encouraged them in the previous episode was to reapply. Things have changed. Obviously the pandemic's changed things drastically. There could be something that may be a better fit for them. But again, they're drawn to that company because of what they feel that company does and how they go about doing that work. And so it identifies with their core values. Some people, who may want to work for faith-based organizations or may work for nonprofits because there's a core alignment to what that mission is. Then lastly here, really considering salary needs and looking at, what of all these various things that you're trying to compose of, how do you get paid? And this is really important for taking care of you and your family. And it's trying to see how that all kind of really works together. And so this is something I want to be not cautious of. You certainly need to have a career that does pay you for the work that you do and for the value that you provide that company. But it may take time to get to the salary level that you really ultimately want to get to, like a dream salary. And I also don't want you to think that that it's kind of taking out, as a friend of mine mentioned, who also is in the kind of career counseling field. Don't take out the gun and start shooting and scare off something that may be more of your purpose. And that's something to kind of be aware of. And so looking at things only through a financial lens can certainly impact your career path in this case per this article, but just be aware that don't always just be aiming for high paying jobs, because it may not be what you really ultimately want to do, which goes back to not only your core values, but also what your interests are. And so with that, I wanted to kind of transition to asking for some feedback from the audience. And so it's really two questions. So the first would be, here we went over kind of a light version of career paths based on this Indeed.com article, and just how that may be something of interest that some of you may be going through. And so my question then is, what other topics would you like to hear more about on this podcast? And so with that said, I'm going to post this to the general, to the audience here, and would love to hear what topics, again, that you'd like to have here in future episodes. In addition to that, I'd also like these first few episodes is more of getting into the rhythm of podcasting live. But what I'd like to do really soon is bring on co-hosts, where I would interview that co-host and hear more about their profession, their career composition at this stage. And I would like to hear from you all to see, what types of careers or professions would you be interested in hearing more about? So it'd be great to get your feedback on that, which would then help me narrow down who I could interview. And so this is where I'd ask them, why they chose that field, how they went about getting started, and then what challenges have they faced so far. And then really, after interviewing them for a little bit of time, I would then open it up to the audience here, and have you ask them questions, and to see if that's something, maybe a career that you've always wanted to do, but you weren't sure it was too far to reach for you. Or maybe it's just hearing about someone else's career composition and how they dealt with certain challenges could help you navigate your current scenario situation, what you're encountering. And so with that, I haven't seen anyone submit any feedback so far, or ask about, or being feeling comfortable to share what their career challenges are currently facing. I'd like to really wrap up this episode. And so it's really just kind of a few somewhat announcements at the end here. And so the first announcement is really as a reminder. So next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern is our next podcast live stream. Love to have you join while it's live. Since this is and the next point is to acknowledge this is the second podcast episode, and there's still a lot of learning that I've been doing personally on this and organizing this, and along with my colleague. And with that said, we're still building out the podcast website and the newsletter, and I hope to have much more progress and talk more about it next week. But I do want to make you aware that if you do want to find out more about that information, again, I'm trying to work over the next few days to build that out. And then lastly, if you have any questions or would like to chat further, please email me at podcast@ careercomposing.com. And with that, I would like to really just, again, thank everyone who is listening to this. And with it, have a great rest of your day and a great week at that.